Well, maybe you've heard of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. It's been out a couple of years. It's getting a lot of conversation out there. And in this book, the social psychologist says that we are, in his words, overprotecting children in the real world and underprotecting children online. And it has resulted in the greatest mental health crisis perhaps our nation has ever faced among teenagers and young adults. Haidt says because of this, there are many, many people entering adulthood with two convictions. The world is a scary place, and I don't have what it takes to navigate it. The world is scary sometimes. When hard times come to your life, will you face it with panic or with peace? Today I want us to look at a story in the Old Testament about three young Hebrew men who faced a great crisis, and they faced it with peace instead of panic. They were probably in their late teens or early 20s when they found out how scary the world really can be. Let's take a look at Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up?" We skip to verse 15. "If you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. Now, we use the phrase trial by fire today to refer to some experience that tests our resilience and our character. In Daniel chapter 3, these three young men were not facing a trial by fire. They were facing a judgment by fire. They were threatened with incineration if they didn't do what the king wanted. They didn't do what the king wanted, and so he sentenced them to death. But it was in this sentence by fire that they experienced a trial by fire, and they came out showing great resilience and great faith. Your trial by fire is coming. It may be some heartbreak with your kids, or a betrayal by a marriage partner, or downsizing at work, or test results from the doctor that change your entire world. Your trial by fire is coming. How can you respond to it with peace instead of with panic? Richard Schrader said that people in our culture are less prepared to deal with suffering and hard times than any other people of any other time in any other culture. Schrader is a cultural anthropologist at the University of Chicago. In one of his books, he reviewed all the different ways that different cultures down through the ages help people try to make sense of suffering. And he said every culture has this as the sort of the dominant worldview to help people make sense of suffering. But he said in the modern West, we see our sense of well-being and worth and success entirely in what happens to us here, what we can amass here, what we can accomplish here, how we measure up against other people in this life. And because of that, he says, Westerners simply see suffering as a roadblock, a hindrance to their ultimate goals. There is no meaning, there is no purpose in it, and so they don't know what to do with it when it comes up and blocks their way to what they think is true happiness and success. And so it crushes us when it comes. And even Christians who are surrounded by this secular culture can get to thinking that way too. A few years ago, Adrian Warnock wrote this for the Desiring God website. He said, "At age 46, my life as I knew it was interrupted without warning. Like countless days before, I was commuting home from a normal day in the office. Suddenly, I found myself at a train station struggling to walk or even breathe. An ambulance took me off to the hospital where I was told I had pneumonia, but then a blood test revealed an abnormality, which resulted in a more sinister diagnosis, a slow-growing form of leukemia. I am a medical doctor," he continues to write, "and I have also received a lot of sound biblical teaching, so you would think I would have been ready when suffering hit. but I was surprised at what a blow it was. In retrospect, I can see more clearly why. First, he says, I see that the blessings of my society shaped my expectations. Like most who read this article, I live in a historical anomaly when it comes to suffering. I have access to clean water, sanitary food, amazing medical technologies, rapid emergency response systems, and social welfare support if I'm unable to work. As a result, I am protected from so many dangers that afflicted my ancestors, and I can feel like everything is under my own control. I can see now how much I assumed I'd be spared from suffering. Second, he writes, I was unprepared because to some extent I'd absorbed a faulty functional theology that many of us share in the Western church today. It isn't the theology I've been taught or thought I believed, but somehow I had not sufficiently challenged the assumption that if I worship and serve God faithfully, He would shield me from serious suffering. Now, this is what Warnock wrote in his experience of being surprised by suffering. We who grow up in the modern Western culture are less prepared for handling suffering when it comes than any other culture at any other time. Even Christians surrounded by this culture, as Warnock's testimony shows, can be caught up in something like this. You and I are going to face tough times regardless of our faith and sometimes because of our faith. We are going to face tough times regardless of our faith. I mean, if your car starts spinning out of control on a slick road, the physics of this world do not change whether you're a believer or a non-believer. We're all going to face difficulties, challenges as fallen people living in a fallen world. As one person has famously put it, God created the heavens and the earth. That's Genesis 1 and 2. But we live in a Genesis 3 world after the fall, where things have been warped or twisted or perverted in some sort of way that wasn't there when God originally created the world. And so you are going to face tough times like anybody else, regardless of your faith. But you are also going to face tough times, unlike anybody else, because of your faith sometimes. And this is what we see in Daniel chapter 3. In the book of Daniel, especially in the first half of Daniel, we read stories of a man named Daniel and three of his friends who were exiled in Babylon. They were Hebrew boys who had been taken out of Jerusalem when Jerusalem was sacked by Babylon, and they were brought into Babylonian captivity. The first half of the book of Daniel is stories about their experiences living in exile. And one of the reasons that more and more people turn to the book of Daniel today is that we more and more realize that we are living a sort of exile life ourselves. We weren't transported to another country, but the culture of our country, the worldview and the viewpoints of our culture around us has changed around us, and we feel like, many times, increasingly so, we feel like exiles in our own country. When it comes to our values, our beliefs, our sexual ethics, our life ethics, we base it on the Bible, and that's going to make us increasingly at odds with the people around us. And from time to time, that difference leads to difficulty. Daniel chapter 3 shows us how this happens in the lives of Daniel's three friends. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar had set up this 90-foot tall statue. It was a symbol of Babylon's global dominance, or at least global for that region, for that area. They were the superpower of the time. It was a symbol of Nebuchadnezzar's rule over Babylon. It was a symbol of the fact that the gods of Babylon had made all of this possible. And so he set this up, and he commanded all these exiles from all these different countries to pay homage, to bow down before this symbol of Babylonian gods and Babylonian power. These three Hebrew young men refused, and they got in trouble for it. From time to time, that is going to be your experience. You will be expected to conform to ways of thinking and behaving that are normal for the world, but are not allowable for you and me who are guided by the Word of God. You do that, you stay strong in your faith, and it is going to, from time to time, impact whether you get to go to the school of your choice, or whether you get into that graduate program, or whether you get to climb the career ladder any further than you are now. It will impact or narrow the number of friends that you might be able to have, or the number of marriage possibilities, romantic partnerships that you might be able to get into. So while the lesson of Daniel 3 applies to whatever difficulty we face, regardless of our faith, it applies especially to difficulties we face because of our faith. Now, how can you respond to tough times with peace instead of with panic, by trusting in God's presence and waiting for God's rescue. Trusting in God's presence and waiting for God's rescue. So write these down on your notes. First of all, trust in God's presence. Let's return to Daniel chapter 3 and pick up the story at verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, Your Majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." So shortly after these 3 young men were thrown into the fire, Nebuchadnezzar looks in and does not see them in torture and in agony, but they're walking around the fire as if they were in pajamas, walking around their own living room. And he says he sees somebody that looks like a son of the gods in that fire with them. Now, Nebuchadnezzar came from a very different theology. He didn't know the Bible. He referred to this one as a son of the gods. In other words, some sort of supernatural being, maybe an angelic being. But we're reading this story from the perspective of the New Testament. And we know who this being was. He wasn't a son of the gods. He was the Son of God in his pre-incarnate form, coming and being with his people when they needed him most. But I said that there were 2 things that these guys had that gave them confidence and peace in the midst of their trials. One was they trusted God's presence. But here's the second thing I want you to do. Wait for God's rescue. Wait for God's rescue. Let's look at Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 26. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. So Nebuchadnezzar orders these young men who've been walking around this furnace with this mysterious 4th man, and he orders them to come out of the fire. And when they do, isn't this an interesting detail, that not only are their clothes unsinged and their skin unsinged, but there was not even a smell of fire upon them. Does God really rescue his people that way? Yes. Always? Yes. He rescues us in this life or in the next life, but he always rescues his people. Sometimes he rescues us in this life, and when he does, rejoice. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were rescued in this life, and no doubt they rejoiced. When the physical healing inexplicably comes and baffles the doctors, rejoice. When money shows up unexpectedly, when you weren't sure how to keep a roof over your head, rejoice. When the job opportunity shows up, when no one seemed to be hiring, rejoice. Thank God for those moments. But he always rescues in this life or in the next. Revelation 7 tells us about that. In Revelation 7, the Apostle John tells us what he saw in heaven. He said, "I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hand. These are they who have come out of the great tribulation." Verse 15, "They are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. Never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst." Note this, "The sun will not beat down on them, nor any scorching heat." The Apostle John could have added, "There was no smell of fire upon them." This is the truth that we find in Revelation chapter 7. There's only one right word for what we find in Revelation chapter 7. It's the word rescued. These men and women were rescued and stand before the throne of God, comforted by God, taken care of God, even after death. Now, some of you may think, well, that's not the kind of rescue I want. What I want to do is be rescued in my predicaments and my troubles from this life. If your religion can't tell me and assure me that God is going to get me out of my fixes and solve all my problems in this life, that's no religion for me. If that's the case, you have just revealed that for you, God is merely a means to an end. For you, God is merely a useful instrument to give you the stuff that you think will really make you happy and secure and your well-being taken care of. God won't do that himself. A relationship with God won't do that himself, you think, but you need God. You come to him from time to time and just ask him for the stuff that you think will settle those issues for you. And if God doesn't come through for you in that way, what use is God for you? So this line of thinking just reveals this messed up theology that some of us have. And sometimes we react with surprise to suffering because that's the theology we've been operating with. I've been doing all these good things. I've been showing up at church. I've been living reasonably right. And when I ask God to fix something or solve something, you're telling me that sometimes he solves it on this earth, that sometimes he rescues me onto eternity. That's not satisfactory for me. So you're seeing God as a loan officer. When I go to a bank, I don't go there so I might build a relationship with the loan officer. I go to the bank to ask him or her for a loan. And that person is good for me, is useful to me, only so far as I get the loan. Some of us look upon God as this sort of glorified loan officer. And we need to understand what these guys in Daniel chapter 3 are saying. You notice they said, we believe that God can rescue us from your hand. But even if he does not, we are not going to bend. We're not going to bow. This is the theology you need to understand. They believed that God was going to take care of them one way or the other, in this life or in the next. So we have to trust God's presence, and we also have to wait for God's rescue. This was so beautifully illustrated in a movie that was shortlisted for the 2024 Oscar season. It was an animated film called The 21. It's only 13 minutes long, and it's free and commercial-free on YouTube. And if you haven't seen it, you really need to see it. I provided a link to this little short movie in my devotional newsletter, Winning Ways. It goes out every Thursday late afternoon, and so if you didn't see that, go back to your email and look for it. Or if you don't get Winning Ways, just send me a request on the connection card, and I'll send you a link so that you'll be able to watch this movie. Parents, you should be able to watch this with your kids, although I'll leave it up to you. It's only 13 minutes, so you watch it first and then decide whether it's something for your kids. The 21, it's about the 21 Christians beheaded by ISIS terrorists on a Libyan beach in 2015. The animation is hand-drawn by 70 different artists in 24 different countries, and it's all in the style of Coptic icons. And it's beautiful, and it's inspiring, and it's sad, as all great art really is. Now, one of the striking things about the film is who accompanies these martyrs on their way to their execution. I want you to take a look at one still image from the film. And you can see on the top that the terrorists are leading these Coptic Christians in their orange jumpsuits along the edge of the water where they'll eventually be knelt down and executed. That's what you see on the top, but what's in the reflection of the water down below? And the reflection of the water down below are these mighty angels who are accompanying these martyrs as they move along toward their execution. And what's so beautiful about this film is how often Jesus shows up in scene after scene after scene. And in one particularly moving scene, there are these sandaled feet of one of the martyrs who steps onto the beach, and then right next to him is another pair of feet, and that pair of feet are nail-scarred. What is this? The feet of Jesus, who come alongside these martyrs to join them in their trial by fire, to join them in their fiery furnace, and then to lead them on into eternity. You see, Jesus, the pre-incarnate Jesus, accompanied Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in their trial until they were rescued in this life. Jesus accompanied these 21 martyrs in 2015 in their trial until they were rescued on into the next life. If Revelation chapter 7 is true, the moment these 21 were beheaded, they were before the throne of God in white robes, bearing palm branches, being supported and sheltered and taken care of by God. You will be rescued in this life or in the next as a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. We learn from the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to trust in God's presence and wait for God's rescue. But God's presence and God's rescue are only possible because Jesus entered into his own fiery furnace. Those feet on the screen were nail scarred. Jesus suffered the fiery furnace of the cross, and he told us he did it so that you and I might be rescued from divine wrath. We might be reunited and joined together by God as Jesus took away our sin, served as our sacrifice on the cross to take away our sin. And so that's why Jesus told his apostles before he went to the cross what the cross was going to accomplish for them. Take a look at John chapter 16, verse 33. I have told you these things, he said, so that in me you may have peace. There's that word again, peace instead of panic as we face our trials and difficulties. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So how do you get this peace that Jesus promised in John chapter 16, verse 33? You have to receive it humbly, and you have to receive it patiently. Humbly and patiently. First of all, you need to receive it humbly. In John 16:33, circle the words, in me. Jesus said, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. The kind of peace that transcends the circumstances and allows you to react to the circumstances with peace instead of panic is not the kind that you work up or gen up yourself. It is something that is given to you in your companionship with the one who's already been in the ultimate fiery furnace on your behalf. And so it is in him that we have this peace. He said, I've overcome the world. What does that mean? He's talking about all that he was going to accomplish, as if it had already been accomplished. Because this was the night before he went to the cross when he said this. But he said, I have overcome the world, speaking in the past tense, as if the cross had already happened. As if the resurrection had already happened, as if the ascension to the right hand of God had already happened, as if his second coming had already happened. He has overcome the world by all of these things, and he's in the process of finishing that work of overcoming the world. He says, I've overcome the world, and that's why in me you can have peace. So he summarizes it all in this way by saying, I've overcome the world. Peace isn't something we develop inside us. He provided it. And we have to humbly ask him to grant us this peace of his. And once we do that, it's smooth sailing, right? I mean, you receive Christ, you get dunked in a tank of water, you get presented to the church as a new member, and it's a worry-free life from then on. Far too easy, right? Far too easy. No. Remember I said that we need to receive this peace that Jesus offers humbly, but also patiently. Patiently. What I mean is real peace doesn't come overnight. Now, don't get me wrong. I've been with enough people to know, and I've experienced it myself. Sometimes that peace just inexplicably comes over you in a moment of crisis, and you're just so grateful that's the experience you have. But when I'm talking about living a life of peace, a life of confidence and trust in God, that's something that has to develop over time. In John 16:33, when Jesus said, these things, I've told you these things, to what was he referring? Well, in the immediate context, he was referring to all that he had taught them in John chapter 14, 15, and 16. This is called the Upper Room Discourse. And it's the longest in John than any of the other Gospels, where he has all these last-minute things he wants to tell them before he is arrested and brought to the cross. John 14, 15, and 16. He talks about what his cross is going to accomplish. He talks about the promise of his resurrection. He talks about how they are to get along with each other and love each other in a radical way so that they can support each other through this life. This is what he talks about in John 14, 15, and 16. But when he says, I have told you these things, you can include everything that Jesus said as recorded in the Gospels, everything leading up to that point. And what you and I need to do is reflect over those things, mull over those things, meditate over those things, have conversations with each other about those things. And when we will do that, the peace that surpasses understanding will come to us over time. You know, imagine as you listen to an accomplished musician, and you'd say, I'd like to do that. I mean, one of the things that's so beautiful about our church and having John Parker here at our church is he is a networker par excellence. I mean, he is able to network with people in all genres of music, and he's had them here on a regular basis or guest hosting or as Easter approaches, maybe you remember a full orchestra up on this stage because he's a networker. And some of you see some of the talent, some of the musicians that get up here and you say, I'd like to play the guitar like that. And so you buy a guitar, and a week later, you're still frustrated that you're not a master guitarist. What's the problem? Well, you got to have the guitar. You got to start there. But then you've got to practice that guitar over time, right? And that's the only way you get skilled as a musician. Likewise, if you're a Christian or if you decide to become one today, that's like buying the guitar. It's a big step. But it takes real practice to get to real peace. To live in this reality, to act in this reality of what Christ has done for you, that takes practice. So in verse 33, Jesus says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. All these things that Jesus has told us, they're like notes. They're like notes on a sheet of music. And what you've got to do then is you've got to take up those notes and you've got to rehearse them and you've got to practice them and you've got to go over them in such a way. You've got to preach the gospel to yourself and remind yourself of the truths of the gospel. And when you do that, you will find yourself over time responding regularly with peace instead of panic whenever the difficulties come up. On our calendars today is May the 4th. And for a lot of people, over the last maybe decade or so, they've started calling it Star Wars Day. Because May the 4th, the date, sounds a lot like the most famous line in the movie, May the Force be with you. And so if you've wondered why people post so many Star Wars memes on your Facebook feed or other social media feed, that's why. Now, I like Star Wars. I like the originals. But here's the thing. I want every May 4th to reflect over another story. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that fourth man in the fire with him. And I want to recommend him to you. No matter what you're going through in this time in your life, may the 4th be with you. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Jesus, I want to respond to my trials with peace instead of panic. You graciously offer peace to me, and I receive it humbly and patiently. I receive it humbly, putting my trust in you. And I commit to patience. I commit to practicing the gospel like someone practices music until it becomes my life. Let this be the truths that we cling to today. In Jesus' name, amen.